Welcome to the Gold Report, where we inspire you to be 10% more courageous in your daily life. Please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll be right back. Do you feel like the healthcare system is failing you? That's because it is, working exactly as intended to prioritize profits, bureaucracy, and big pharma, while leaving you and your family vulnerable when you need care the most. We understand your frustration. You've been asked to trust a system that feels rushed, impersonal, and biased. You deserve better. That's why we created Gold Care. Here, your values matter, your choices matter, and most importantly, you matter. Gold Care is more than a solution. It's a revolution. Trusted by over 10,000 members nationwide, we've built a system that puts your wellness first. With ethical, independent doctors who work for you, not the system, you'll have access to care that's transparent, trustworthy, and aligned with your values. We understand that stepping away from the familiar can feel daunting, but staying in a system that doesn't truly serve you is even harder. That's why Gold Care offers a healthcare alternative designed to work for you. Whether you're ready to step away from the system entirely or prefer to keep your insurance while seeking the transparent care, ethical doctors, and education you deserve, it's time to stop trusting a system that's failed you. Take control of your health with Gold Care. Join today for just $10 a month and become part of the healthcare revolution. Gold Care, built for you, powered by freedom, trusted by thousands. We have such a powerful guest to share with you today. Let me tell you about him. C.J. Hopkins is an award-winning playwright, novelist, and political satirist whose works have been showcased globally. His latest book is Fear and Loathing in the New Normal Reich, and delves into the rise of authoritarianism in the West, drawing from his personal legal ordeal in Germany. Hopkins faced criminal charges for allegedly disseminating pro-Nazi propaganda after tweeting the cover art on his book. This Kafkaesque experience, where he was pronounced guilty without a trial, then acquitted, and subsequently unacquitted, underscores the absurdities and dangers of contemporary censorship practices. The book's provocative content led to its being banned by Amazon, further highlighting the challenges faced by voices who are critical of prevailing narratives. Hopkins' essays and commentary are featured in publications like Consent Factory, Off Guardian, and Zero Hedge. Notable figures who have recognized his contributions include our Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr., who described him as our modern Jeremiah, while J.D. Vance remarked that the free world should be repulsed by the German state's pursuit of C.J. Hopkins. It's really an honor to have him on the show today. Welcome, C.J. Hopkins.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. So I started out by asking where you were right now, because I do follow you on Substack, and I know that you have to, you're in Germany mostly. And I don't think most of our viewers know you. And I'm just wondering if you would like to kind of give them a bit of a background as to who you are, why you've caught my attention.
I usually just introduce myself very briefly and just say that I'm a playwright and a novelist and a political satirist. Spent many, many years working in the theater. Wrote my first novel a few years ago. It's about to be, a new edition of it is about to be released, so that's nice. And I've been writing political satire and commentary since about 2016. I got interested when whatever you want to call it, the populist rebellion kind of began with Brexit and Trump and what have you. And I started writing my satirical columns then. I'm pretty sure the reason that you have me on is because those columns and my satirical activity and commentary led to me getting prosecuted here in Germany for tweeting the cover art of one of my books and challenging the COVID measures, the so-called emergency measures, back in 2022. So that's the short version.
So the reason I find this very interesting is sometimes people want to say that me, for example, a physician, was motivated by some deep right, far right wing agenda. I was actually motivated to speak up in 2020 because as a physician, I absolutely knew that what I was seeing was propaganda and censorship. Absolutely, bar none. Just as I know water is wet, I knew hydroxychloroquine was safe. For example, I knew that masks don't keep out tiny respiratory viruses. For those reasons, I started speaking out. And I was shocked to find how censored I was. And I started basically preaching how dangerous censorship is. And in fact, you know me as frontline doctors, but our 501c3 charity, our fish is actually the Free Speech Foundation. I've always known that the foundation of everything that we hold dear is free speech. So whether it's COVID speech or political speech, the elite, powerful people want to silence people with temporarily unpopular opinions. That's why it's very important for me to have someone like yourself on, because I'd love to maybe ask you kind of specifically in 2022, what was it that you said that you think got the wrath of powerful people on you? Was there something specific? In my case, for example, it was definitely hydroxychloroquine. If I put any video out that said hydroxychloroquine, we were banned. So it was a very specific thing. I was wondering what it was in your case.
Yeah, why don't I try to give you and your audience just a summary of the whole thing. I didn't want to do it right at the beginning because it gets kind of long. I mean, I started writing in the beginning. To tell you the truth, I didn't take it too seriously. This is back in early 2020, and I wrote a couple of just funny columns. Because I just thought, okay, this is mass hysteria, and it'll pass in a couple of weeks. And it didn't. And then it got really serious and really scary. I started seeing just the systematic propaganda that was being pumped out. I actually compiled, I think it's 257 tweets that were just citations from the mainstream media, not from any strange sources, but just documenting the messaging that was being pumped out at the beginning of the COVID event. And the messaging was unmistakably clear. It was, your democratic rights are over. We're in a state of emergency. We will do martial law if we have to. You will obey orders, or we will come down on you like a ton of bricks. People can go dig that thread out and take a look at it. I think a lot of people have forgotten just how authoritarian and just how sudden it was. The whole thing was rolled out in the course of those first 6-8 weeks. I started following that pretty closely, and I started writing a lot of commentary and satire about it. In 2022, I collected the essays that I had written during those years, 2020 and 2021, collected them in a book, which I had been doing since 2016. Every couple of years, I'll put out a collection of my essays. And the name of the book was The Rise of the New Normal Reich. The new normal is what they were broadcasting in the beginning. We're in a new normal. All the rules are off. So published this book, The Rise of the New Normal Reich, and my cover artist, Anthony Freda, who's brilliant, he and I, what we did for the cover, we stole William Shirer's classic cover from his book that I think a lot of Americans will know, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. So it has a black, it's a black cover with big red letters, and underneath the title, there's a little white circle with a swastika. And what we did for my book is we kept that design and we covered up the swastika with one of the medical looking masks that we were all forced to wear. So you see the mask, and then if you squint and you look beneath it, so what is that behind it? Oh, it's a swastika. And of course, the whole point of that, I had been warning people in my columns for a long time, is that what we're watching is we're watching the rollout of a new form of totalitarianism. And it's not 20th century totalitarianism. It isn't, Nazism. It's not Stalinism. It's a new form. But I'm going to go ahead and make a comparison to the best known, form of 20th century totalitarianism. So the book came out. It did really well. Everything was going great. The next thing I know, I get a notice from the Berlin prosecutor that I'm under investigation for disseminating pro-Nazi propaganda. Because basically what happened was I sent out 2 tweets in August of 2022. This is when the Germans were debating, should we cancel the mask mandates? And most people were saying, no, we must keep the mask mandates. And I put these 2 tweets out criticizing mask mandates and mocking the health minister, Karl Lauterbach. And I used the artwork from the book in the tweets. So these got reported. Long story short, they opened up a criminal investigation of me, which led to my criminal prosecution. The authorities had Amazon ban my book in Germany. It's also banned, outside of Amazon. It's not an official ban, but you can't buy it in any bookstore. You can get all my other books. They reported me to the German FBI, basically the Bundeskriminalamt. And all of this led to my first trial, where I went to court. And of course, I was acquitted. The judge didn't like me at all, but she followed the law. And this is an important point that a lot of Americans don't understand. A lot of Americans think, oh, swastikas are illegal in Germany. And they're not. Yes, there's a ban on neo-Nazis displaying swastikas, which I actually, I'm a free speech absolutist, but I make an exception for this ban. I don't want to see neo-Nazis running around in the streets of Berlin, waving swastikas. Of course, there's a ban on swastikas, but there are many exceptions to this ban. You couldn't show a Quentin Tarantino movie or teach a history class if there weren't exceptions to this ban. A couple of notable exceptions right around the time that I was going to trial. Der Spiegel, the big German national magazine that everybody knows, and Stern, the other big German magazine that everybody knows, they both printed covers of their magazines with huge swastikas on the cover. Der Spiegel basically printed a cover with exactly the same concept as the cover of my book. They had a big swastika covered by a German flag. I had a little swastika covered by a medical mask. Yeah. So that's just to make the point. There are many exceptions to this ban. The judge knew this in my first trial. She didn't like me at all, called me names, but acquitted me because according to the law, what I did is perfectly legal. Here comes the fun part. In Germany, the prosecution is allowed to appeal an acquittal verdict, which the prosecution did, which eventually brought me to my second trial in the higher court, the appeals court, where they overturned my acquittal and convicted me of disseminating pro-Nazi propaganda. So at that point, we had no alternative. My lawyer and I have filed a complaint. We've sent the case to the German Supreme Court. And so we are waiting to hear back. But that's the whole bizarre story.
Wow, I did not capture all of that. I'm appreciative. I think it's utterly fascinating. I do have some specific questions. I just want to point out most Americans actually don't know about the steps that Germany and then much of Europe later went on in terms of restricting speech after World War II in an effort to perhaps avoid the mistakes that Germany made for so many years that led to the World War II. Germany was very sensitive to the subject of Nazism, and they outlawed, banned using Nazi language, with the exceptions that C.J. Hopkins just mentioned. But I've always held that that was very, very dangerous. I'm join you on being a free speech absolutist, and I've always known this, and I think you can ask any child this. I remember when I was about 10 years old, neo-Nazis wanted to march in a very Jewish town outside Chicago called Skokie, Illinois, where many Holocaust survivors lived. And my father asked me what I thought of it. I think I was about 10 or younger. And I remember saying, well, I think they should march. Now, I just share with you, I'm Jewish and my father's a Holocaust survivor. So I know the pain that it would cause a lot of elderly Jews to see neo-Nazis walking down the street with swastikas, but I also knew that if you silence speech, the trouble's vastly worse than a Sunday afternoon, watching haters walk down a street. I thought that was self-evident. Back in the day, ACLU and I were on the same side. Now I stand alone with that. So I just want to caution people that when you, with the proper intentions, start legislating against speech, which theoretically was a proper motivation in the 1950s that Germany wanted to do, a self-analysis. Fast forward 50 years and less, and you see what happens to ordinary speech that is disfavored. The examples you give where people used similar graphics and are not prosecuted is exactly what people need to take note of. When you have laws on the books and they are selectively enforced, that is tyranny, that is fascism, and that's inevitable if you put these laws on the books. I'm just gonna, I want to ask you, this will be a fun conversation. So in Germany did have kind of this unique, role that it went through, right, in the 20th century. And how do I even ask this question? So we're now seeing the end result of what happens when the government, with proper intentions, good intentions, tries to legislate speech. So what is the proper answer to hate speech? I mean, I know what I think, but you tell me.
Well, I've got two answers for you. My one general answer is, I think hate speech and the concept of hate speech and the concept of hate crime is kind of ridiculous. I said this, I explained this in an interview a little while back. We have crimes in the statutes that are covered already. It's if I go and attack someone and scream racial epithets at them, well, you can prosecute me for attacking them. You can prosecute me for assault. We don't need an extra law that prosecutes me in a special way because I was motivated by hatred. And the same thing for hate speech generally. I disagree a bit when it comes to Germany. I do make an exception for Germany. It really hasn't been that long since World War II and the Nazis and the Holocaust and all of it. And Germany, the fact that Germany is still wrestling with its history, it's understandable. I've lived here for 20 years, and this is the one exception that I make to my free speech absolutism. The point that I want to make, that I've made several times, is I don't really have a problem with this law. The way the law is written, it is written specifically to ban neo-Nazis from trying to start Nazism all over again. That's why all of the exceptions are written into it. The problem is not with the German law. The problem is that the law is being twisted in order to silence dissent, in order to make examples of people like me. And I'm hardly the only one. There are German artists who are being prosecuted for the same thing. This law specifically, I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with the way that it's written. What I have a problem with is the hypocrisy and the perversion of the law that is being carried out by the German authorities blatantly to make examples of COVID dissidents, people that spoke out about against the government. The comparison between the Spiegel cover and my book, I think it's the clearest. Basically, Der Spiegel, they were comparing the AfD party to the Nazis. I was comparing the German authorities to the Nazis. You can compare the AfD party to the Nazis all day long. You can do it right on the cover of your national magazine. But if you compare the behavior of the German authorities to the Nazis, well, then you end up getting criminally prosecuted. That's not a question of how the law is written. That's a question of how the laws are being enforced and how dissent is being silenced here. That's what it is.
So this is a really important conversation, though. It's because we agree completely that it's all on the people who are enforcing and interpreting laws that are on the books. That's what I'm saying, is that you have a law that maybe is valid. You've read it. I haven't really read it closely, but the authority is vesting in somebody in how to interpret it. In America, for just conversation purposes, we have about 300,000 federal statutes, federal regulations, federal statutes, so many that people say that we don't know how many there are. And those statutes can be used to indict people essentially who are dissidents. So that's what they did. Example, in my case on January 6th, they took a law that looks fine on the surface and then they weaponized that law. So even though the law was perhaps written carefully, as you said, downstream, I think it's predictable that humans will favor and disfavor certain groups. So I appreciate the sensitivity that Nazism wasn't so long ago, and there's a social purpose to kind of keep it off the political screen, maybe for 100 years in Germany. But it's also kind of inevitable in a way, I think, what happened to you.
I was going to ask you about your case. I was going to bring up your case because I think it's another example. One point that I've made a few times is when a government, when any ruling power, when a government decides to do this, decides that it wants to crack down on dissent, decides that it wants to make examples of people, and that it is willing to pervert the laws on its books to do that, no statutes are going to protect us when the government has the power and the will to do this. The way that the laws are written are not going to protect us. This is what I've been trying to focus people's attention on, is that this is not a problem that can be fixed by rewriting a German law. It's a problem that has to be addressed by reining in these German authorities that are behaving like authoritarians or totalitarians, if you want to go that far. And yeah, I would say the same thing. I've read a little bit about your case, and I would say that as far as I know, you were inside the Capitol, you made a speech.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so they sent you to jail, which is bizarre. It was so obviously done to make an example of you. The way I've described it, it's the oldest trick of power in the book. It's heads on spikes. That's what it's about.
We, again, completely agree that it almost doesn't matter what the law is. They'll find a way to get the person. And even though yours had a pretext of similarity with something that was written on the books, in my case, there actually was no similarity with what was written on the books and what I was charged with. There's a very specific statute that I was charged with, about 350 January 6ers were charged with. It's 18 U.S.C. 1512 C2. It ended up being reversed by the Supreme Court a year ago. However, this law was an accounting regulation. This law says you can't obstruct or shred evidence. And it had to do with the Enron scandal from 20 years ago, where they stated that the Arthur Andersen accounting firm shredded evidence. How that law would have anything to do with anybody who was physically present on January 6th is ridiculous. Eventually, 2 years later, the Supreme Court threw it out, or 3 years later. But your point is well taken. That's why I share it, which is it really didn't even matter. In my case, the law wasn't even related. It wasn't like trespass was the main thing, right? So yeah, so this is really, let's shift about your story. I want people to understand how dangerous this is when you have authoritarian instincts in judges or police, for example. Are there some words of wisdom you can share with people who don't see it as such a threat as you and I do? I have family members who really think this is just a problem for people who were fringe, for example, people who thought hydroxychloroquine worked, suddenly that was fringe. Do you have any words you can share to alert people who don't recognize what a threat this is, why this should matter to them?
Sure. I don't want to start preaching, but the through line of a lot of my work since I started writing, essays and columns and political commentary, the through line has been I'm going to turn 64 this year. So for basically half of my life since the Cold War ended, what I think I've been watching and documenting, commenting on, is the transformation of the world that I was born into and grew up in. I'm watching the transformation of the system that we all live under into a more authoritarian, more totalitarian form. And it has been happening gradually, step by step. And again, I want to stress, it's not going back to 20th century totalitarianism. It's not the Nazis. It's not Stalinism. It's a new and different form. Basically, my take on it is, when the Cold War ended, we became a one system world. It's a very complex system. It has many moving parts. There's not a little group of conspirators running the whole thing. It's a big, complex system, but it is one system and it dominates the whole planet. That system doesn't have any external adversaries because it encompasses the entire globe. That system is evolving in a completely predictable way into a more totalitarian form, into a new form of totalitarianism. And I'll give you concrete examples. I'll go back. If you go back to the period after the Cold War ended, there was a period where nobody really knew what was going on, and let's go, we'll bomb the former Yugoslavia, whatever. And everyone was kind of getting their bearings, and there was talk of the New World Order, if people remember that. And then along came the War on Terror. And it's like, oh my God, it's a global state of emergency. We have to, strip people of their constitutional rights and, put soldiers in the streets and surveil everybody, or else the terrorists will win. It's an emergency. The War on Terror continued like that, conditioning us all to feel like we're living, under threat constantly. So we have to give up our rights and let the TSA guys feel up our kids at the airport, and take our shoes off and put our liquids in little bottles and all this senseless stuff. The War on Terror continued right up to 2016, right after Brexit, and when Trump started getting popular and these populist movements started, right populist movements in Europe. And suddenly the system was like, oh, we've got some resistance happening in the house right here and the War on Terror was switched off, and they switched on what I call the war on populism. And then came Russiagate and Hitlergate and all of this insanity, trying to convince people that Trump was a Russian agent and he was going to, launch some sort of revolution with his underground army of, American Putin Nazis or whatever. It was madness. And this built and built and built right up to the end of Trump's first term, right up to 2020, and whoops! Now we've got a new emergency, right? Now it's a global health emergency, and we have to lock everybody inside their homes, and you have to wear silly masks on your face, to simulate a global plague, and on and on and on it goes. What I think I'm watching, what I'm trying to document, is just a series, one state of emergency after another, each one, and they come from both the left and the right, It doesn't really matter. They kind of alternate, one state of emergency after another, and each one conditions us a little bit more to get used to, we have to give up some more of our rights. Oh, no, if we don't give up our rights, the virus will kill everybody. If we don't give our rights, Trump will, take over the world, right. And what's happening is we are gradually being walked into a much, much different world than the one I was born into.
And that's actually why I asked the question, is because young people don't know. I'm younger than you, but I'm not as young as young people. And they don't know, like, it's pretty normal to them to just not have a lot of freedom. It really is heartbreaking for me. You haven't heard me say this, but you and I say certain things, very, very identical concepts. So I just wrote my third book was just published. I think you would love it, CJ. It's called Selective Persecution: The Legalization of American Fascism. And I devote a lot of time to explaining how tyranny is not going to look like Stalin or Hitler or Mao or Mussolini. It's 21st century. It's different. it's going to look actually closer to the CCP. It's going to look like oppressive bureaucracy, digital social control, all of those things. So I've heard you say it now twice in this last half hour. So I completely share that with you. I completely share with you the tyranny. These steps can come from the right or the left. I do try to tell young people that right now I'm called a right wing person. And I fully expect that in 30 years from now, when I haven't changed at all, I will be called a left wing person. I absolutely expect that because I think it just flips over time. So I believe the biggest threat to free societies is actually from medical tyranny, because I think, unlike economic or religious tyranny, people are so anxious about their health that you can get them to give up all of their freedoms. That's what we saw. If you don't know, Trump exited the United States of America out of the WHO on his first day. His first day. He did many things on his first day, but leaving the WHO was critical. I'm wondering if you have thoughts about medical tyranny in particular being the gateway drug to tyranny.
Oh boy, do I. Let me let me say first, I'll get a copy of your book. It sounds great, and maybe folks can get both of our books.
Yeah.
My publisher will kill me if I don't plug mine. My latest book that just came out is it covers my prosecution, the investigation, the prosecution, and all of that, and including the statements that I made to the German court. Medical.
We will say it again at the end, but please go ahead and say the book name again and where to find it.
Oh yeah, it's I stole from Hunter Thompson this time. It's Fear and Loathing in the New Normal Reich, and you can get it anywhere that books are sold. Medical tyranny. Here's my thing on that, and I've written several columns about this, and it is actually I think kind of the underlying theme of my novel, Zone 23, that's about to come out. I've been talking about pathologized totalitarianism. My focus is a little different than yours, but I've been trying to describe the new totalitarianism that I see emerging as a post-political form of totalitarianism. In other words, a pathologized form of totalitarianism, where dissidents or government opponents, people who challenge power, we are no longer perceived and dealt with as political opposition, right? We are instead dealt with as people who are unhinged or mentally deranged, or we are extremists, or we are COVID deniers, right? And the terminology and the tactic is shifting, and of course it is, because there isn't really any political opposition to the system that I'm talking about. It's a global system. When a system is totally hegemonic, when it is global, and again, it doesn't have an outside adversary, it doesn't have an outside enemy. All of its opposition, all of its adversaries are internal to the system, and thus they all become insurgents. Right? Everything, any challenge becomes an insurgency. And this system doesn't treat an insurgency like a political insurgency. It treats it like an illness, like a cancer in its body. So that the very notion of challenging power becomes pathologized, and we become a form of disease. This is only, I think, reinforced constantly by what you're talking about, which is just this extreme hyper focus on health and disease, and and this constant fomenting of fear. I'm sorry, young people are not going to understand this, but I grew up in a world where people, I was born into a world where people lived their lives. They drank, they smoked, the kids we ran around wild in the neighborhood,
Exactly.
unsupervised. There were no car seats, and everyone lived these lives which were pretty good. And at the end of them, you died, and that was the cycle of life. And I feel like we're entering this world of just constant paranoia of, something's going to get me. I'm going to get sick somehow.
Yes. By the way, oh my God, and I'm not going to belabor this, but yes. And it seems like there's this feeling that if only I do everything exactly the way the fearmongers say, I actually won't die at the end of it. Like that is really, they won't say that because they know it's crazy, but it sounds very much like that. Everyone is trying to avoid. It's horrific. You can imagine for me as a doctor, and watching doctors fall for this has been unbelievable. May I just ask you two very specific questions because I'm curious. Years ago, I met Reiner Fulmick, and he just happened to ask me, do I think that the American judicial system is corrupt? And I was so naive. I actually said, I don't think most of the judges are corrupt. I said, I don't know. I think the system's basically not corrupt. That was maybe 4 years ago. I have seen face to face how corrupt the system is, but it's not corrupt in the way I think ordinary people think so. It's not mostly a judge taking cash from somebody else. That's not the corruption. The corruption is like almost like a rotting of the brain, or a rotting of the brain, an inability to see what's in front of them if it deviates from the groupthink that's all around them, and also a weakness, a kind of a weakness of their character, where they can't actually do what they think they should do. And you wouldn't know this, but I've been involved in a lot of litigation where I've had judges say from the bench, the other side is lying, the other side is cheating, the other side is stealing, I should put the other side in jail, but I won't. And I'm like, okay, right? So I'm curious what you think in Germany or in America about the judicial system in general, your experience now that you've been through it.
I kind of think the same thing about it that I think about the mainstream media, the corporate media, or in Germany, it's the corporate and state media. I don't know if you remember it. I'll bring it up. People can look it up. There's a famous interview. It was a guy from the BBC, I forget his name, interviewing Noam Chomsky. And they were talking about censorship and talking about the Chomsky and Herman's censorship model that they put forth in their book. And at the end of the interview, they're going back and forth, and the BBC interviewer is telling him, look, I really don't understand, Mr. Chomsky, Professor Chomsky, what you're talking about, because nobody has ever, told me that I can't report something. No one has ever told me what to report. They've never told me, what to think or how to look at an issue, and so on. And Chomsky looks at him and says, of course they haven't, because if you didn't already think the way that you think, you wouldn't be sitting where you're sitting. The point is, you're talking about the legal system, judges and lawyers, and translate it to the mainstream media if you want, and pretty much anywhere in our societies. And this is nothing strange. This is a natural part of systems. By the time people get into these positions of power, they have been schooled and vetted and conditioned, and the rebels, the renegades, have been weeded out. By the time those guys put those robes on that you're talking about, by the time that the people at CNN and MSNBC and NPR get on the air, they've proven to the system that they think the right thoughts, right, and see things the right way, and are willing to do the right thing.
I have a question for you. Just how do you explain people like me, for example? I know that there's not so many, but there were doctors like myself, and actually they existed all over the world. And it's very interesting. You may not know, I'll just real brief. I went to medical school when I was 19, and I graduated medical school when I was 23. I also went to law school, Stanford Law School. So I have a very impeccable resume, credentials. I mean, I was a golden child and, brilliant. And, who does med school, law school, 23, 26 years old, right? But I've never not thought for myself, never. So I'm curious, how do you account for people, the dissidents, those who continue to think for themselves? I'm just wondering what you think.
I'll give you my funny answer first, and then I'll try to give you a serious answer. I've joked about it. I joked about it in one of my columns, and I was actually trying to to make peace with a lot of my former friends and colleagues who dropped me and ostracized me and demonized me when I started pushing back against COVID. I was trying to say, look, I understand. It's the natural thing to do when totalitarianism rolls into town and basically tells everybody, hey, we're running things now, and you'll do what we say, or we'll hurt you very badly, and we'll hurt your families. We'll ruin your career. We'll destroy your ability to pay your mortgage and send your kids to school. And most people, the vast majority of people, say, all right, I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to cooperate. I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to take care of my family. And my joke is that the people like me and like you, we're the crazy, we're the fools, we're the ones that get taken out and lined up against the wall because we can't keep our heads down. The serious answer is I don't know. I have been this way all my life. I don't know. Do I joke sometimes that I have a problem with authority. I think a lot of it is probably just in our natures. I know for me, some of it was my upbringing. I was raised by my mother and my aunt mostly, and they were both really feisty. So I don't know why it is. I know that there are folks like us, and we just won't back down regardless of how much they punish us.
I think it's very important, and I think some of this can be learned or improved. You were oriented towards this way. I suppose I was oriented towards this way. But the reason we do the Gold Report specifically is I know people can be 10% more courageous in their daily life. I know this. And it starts small. It starts with not censoring yourself. As you have pointed out, you wouldn't get to those places if you weren't already thinking the way they wanted you to think. It's a form of self-censorship that people engage in. And people do this all the time, right? You bite your tongue if your mother-in-law is coming over, you don't want to get into a fight. But you need to not self-censor yourself in terms of your beliefs when your beliefs should be heard. So that's a step that people can actually do, is to stop censoring yourself. When you take those baby steps, or when you say, if you don't have to get into fights with people, but when they're talking about the masks, if you know the masks don't work, you should say so, and you should say your opinion. The reason is that you start flexing these muscles and you actually start getting stronger. So I believe some people are more oriented like this, but I believe most people can strengthen this ability. And I think we have to talk about the fact that we need people to strengthen this ability. We want to raise children that can do this. We have raised so many children who are scared. They're so scared of cancel culture. One of the chapters in my book talks a lot about cancel culture. Nobody's really endured more cancel culture than me, except perhaps Trump. I mean, I have really endured a lot of cancel culture, and it's not pleasant. However, the alternative is worse. The alternative is to silence yourself. I had a conversation with Jordan Peterson, and I said, people have a right to hear what I say. And he said, and you have a right to say it, because if you don't say it, you change as a person. So I want to encourage everybody from examples like yours, where for whatever quirk of nature, you pushed back all your life and you weren't going to change your nature. When COVID came around and you've paid a high penalty for it. However, you do serve as an example for people. Here you are. You're still writing. You're still speaking. You're still sharing your voice. And I want people to be emboldened by that. I want them to join you.
Bless you. That's great. I don't know if I'm quite as optimistic and hopeful as you are, but I agree with you that people can do more, and people can take small steps. I was serious when I was trying to understand a lot of the people that went along because not going along was going to cost them their home and their family and so on. And I made the point over and over again. I've been a poor, struggling artist for most of my life, and I don't have any kids, so I'm in a position where I could do this. But I think your point is great, because even those people who might look at it and say, "Oh my God, if I speak out, if I challenge my boss here, if I challenge these policies, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose the house, and I won't be able to take care of my kids. The question is, what can you do? What is possible to do? It's not I have to jump up and get myself, sent to jail, or I have to, go along and keep my mouth shut. There are baby steps. There are these other steps. All, what an analogy that I often make, because I think about, I live in Germany, and I think about the Second World War and the Holocaust a lot. Not everyone challenged the Nazis and got taken out and, hanged or put up against a wall and shot. There were people who went about their lives and they smuggled Jews out of the country, and they hid Jews in their cellar. And that was the most that they could do, right, without getting their families killed and getting themselves killed. But they did it. They did something. They found the thing that they were able to do so that they could still respect themselves and still do the right thing.
Exactly. That you said that so well. Not everybody has to take the sword, fall on the sword like I did, or C.J. Hopkins has done, and others. But there is more that you can do in your daily life. And it really does start by not censoring yourself, not allowing yourself to be censored. It really does start there. It also feels, you feel stronger as you go along. You really end up empowering yourself. And after these last 4 to 5 years, I haven't met anybody who's regretted it. It's true that I do talk to more skewed people that have taken on bigger challenges, but I do know a lot of people who did what you said. They would come to America's Frontline Doctors and they would volunteer, and they kept their job in the outside world, and they did wear the mask, but they were volunteering for us, for example. They did what they could. And I just want to encourage people to do that. One more time, your book.
The book that just came out is Fear and Loathing in the New Normal Reich. And it's my collected essays from 2022 to 2024. So this is really the aftermath of the whole COVID era, and basically how we got from there to where we are here.
Exactly. That's true. it was such parallels. So I wrote a first early short book called I Do Not Consent, My Fight Against Medical Cancel Culture. And that took us really up to like 2020. And then this latest book, Selective Persecution, is really comprehensive. I think you're especially a person who would enjoy it. It really is a historical reference of everything we went through in the last 4 years. There's a ton of references in there. Who said what when? You may not know as much about the COVID story. I don't know, but what Fauci did in COVID was really Fauci, what I call Fauci 2.0. And I make all the direct comparisons to Fauci 1.0, which was AIDS. And the similarities are unbelievable. It's like jaw dropping. So so find that one too, Selective Persecution. Also, most people, I guess, get it on Amazon. I just want to say, I wish for you that the German Supreme Court is able to think clearly and righteously and do the right thing. We hope the best for Germany as a nation. And if they don't side with you, the future for Germany looks quite bleak. So keep us apprised on that. And thank you for joining us today.
It's been a real pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, CJ. Thanks for joining me on the Gold Report today. I hope you've been inspired to be 10% more courageous in your daily life. Remember to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.